Hi, everyone. I'm Regina McClinton, the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the College of Pharmacy. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural session of the McKesson Foundation Health Equity Speaker Series. We are so glad to have you here for this first installment, and we will begin with remarks from our Dean, Dr. Vicki Ellingrod. Dean Ellingrod is the John Gideon Cyril Professor of Pharmacy, as well as a professor of psychiatry in the medical school and an adjunct professor of psychology in our LSNA college. Dean Ellingrod is a founding member of the College of Psychiatric and Neurologic Pharmacists and also a fellow of the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, as well as the American College of Clinical Pharmacy. She is a highly accomplished scholar, educator, and administrator, and has dedicated her career to mentoring the next generation of pharmacy and translational science leaders. Please join me in welcoming Dean Vicki Ellingrod.
Thank you very much, Regina. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural session of the McKesson Foundation Health Equity Speaker Series. For those of you that might be joining us through Zoom and using an assisted listening device, I am a white person who identifies and presents herself as female with short auburn, somewhat graying hair, wearing a gray sweater and a pink top. Now, to get us started today, the McKesson Foundation is dedicated to eliminating barriers to healthcare in vulnerable communities. Its most recent efforts have really been to challenge pharmacy schools to create programming to accomplish this goal through education. The University of Michigan College of Pharmacy is very proud to be one of the 5 schools whose proposals were chosen by the foundation, and this speaker series was a major component of that proposal. We are so pleased that you are joining us today, both in person and through Zoom. And we are also glad to co-host today's presentation with the Department of Nephrology at Michigan Medicine. I would now like to introduce Dr. Dushan Sun, who's the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Pharmacy, as well as the Charles R. Walgreen Jr. Professor of Pharmacy and a Professor of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Dr. Sun will now introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Vicki. With regarding to health disparity, we all recognize it. We all know that's the problem. We all agree need to be fixed. And many of us on this campus actually have a research program and a clinical practice to really address this problem. On the other hand, we also have many of us like me, like, oh, this may be pretty remote to me. And we are living in Ann Arbor, which is pretty far away from Detroit and Flint. And we have a very good healthcare system. We are not doing research in health disparity. And we just see, oh, maybe that's not really related to me. So we're really fortunate today to have Dr. Wells with us today to talk to us why this matters to all of us. And we heard this problem from community. We heard this problem from academic center, from a government agency, from funding agency. And we just cannot rely on government to throw more money. Say, hey, we just give you the money, solve the problem. It does not work. We have to come out with a solution. So we are really fortunate today to have Dr. Wells. We'll talk about using extensive data and his personal practice experience to show where's the problem. And when I first time I heard it, it's eye-opening. It's actually different from what I thought. I'm sure it's different from you, what you thought from the different problem. So the more important task is to identify a solution. The solution has to be innovative, has to be feasible, has to be financially make sense. Otherwise, we cannot solve this problem. So really, I think we're glad to have Dr. West today to really share his own experience to find the solution. And I'm also very impressed. As a physician, he actually worked on the problem for pharmacy desert, which is very related to our mission in pharmacy school. So Dr. Wells is trained as MD from University of South Florida and also get his PhD in University of South Carolina. After his fellowship in Sweden, He joined a faculty in McKesson University of Milwaukee. He also currently serves as a director of rheumatology and immunotherapy. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Wells.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sun, for that introduction. Thanks for all faculty members for sharing some time with me today. We've met a lot of people. I can tell you, just as we were driving back to the hotel, telling you a little story. I call myself a kind of a nerd. I'm a big fan of Greek mythology. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to share some things with you and think about. So I'm going to share with you a story first about a Greek god. Let's see here. I need to get rid of that. A Greek god called Tantalus. So Tantalus, I call him. He was a bad boy. He was the son of Zeus, and you see the nymph. He would spend his days with the gods and his nights with all the humans, and he would spend a lot of time with them. And he was really, really smart. He thought he would tempt the gods. He was the one who stole the recipe for ambrosia. This is how we know the recipe for ambrosia today. And he did something else. This is going to sound kind of gross, but he killed his son and put him up and chopped him up into a stew. He said he was going to test the gods and see if they were smart enough and figured it out. Fortunate enough, they were able to find out who it was, and the gods and his father Zeus punished him. So he kicked him out of the garden, and then put him into this torture, which we call, is almost like a hell. It's called Tartarus. And Tartarus he would live in, you see all the nice fruits and vegetables. You have fish in the oceans and in the water. And he would go to reach for that fruit, and then the fruit would get out of his reach. He would go to pick up a fish, and he couldn't pick up that fish. And that became known as the Tartarian punishment, the Tantalus punishment. It's where we get the word tantalized from today. You got something good, but it's out of your reach. You can't have it. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight. And that's where it sends a message around with disparities. These are my disclosures. I review for the Journal of Racial and Ethnic Disparities. I have no specific disclosure that relates to this topic. Everybody says this, and we'll talk about defining what health disparities are. I'm also going to discuss about it. Really, as again, for full disclosure, I'm a rheumatologist. I'm going to put my rheumatology hat on. But whether you're a nephrologist, rheumatologist, pharmacologist, this is going to relate to you all. We'll talk about this as well. And just like Dr. Sun said, it's going to say, hey, why should it matter for all of us? But most importantly, is identify those problems. Let's talk about solutions. Let's say, how do we bridge that gap going from disparities and making it to equities? Everybody said, well, I'm not treating gods, and I don't know anything about Tantalus or whatever you say. But let me give you a real story about a real patient I see in my practice. 70-year-old lady with type 2 diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis and osteoporosis. Her diabetes is poorly controlled because she's on prednisone. It's the only drug that she can afford. You know, we have amazing drugs now. These drugs can cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. As we were chatting earlier, it's the Medicare patients who get shortchanged because of that, not being able to afford things. She's on insulin, but her insurance company, guess what? Won't cover the continuous glucose monitor. So her hemoglobin A1C lives at 8.2. Everybody's happy with that. That's not good enough to think about control. Like we see, particularly in the Midwest, I have patients who speak Swedish. As Dr. Sun talking about, I speak Swedish as my second language. She was Turkish. She's missed several appointments because she has to travel an hour and a half away. I work in Milwaukee. I have people drive 2 hours from Green Bay, Wisconsin. So this is not that unusual, hour and a half in a clinic. So if she doesn't have somebody to come with her, we don't always have a Turkish interpreter that's available, even though we reach out to them online. Wanted to do a televisit with her, virtual visit, but guess what? She has no internet access at home. These are the patients that we deal with. I do clinical trials. I can put a patient in a trial to get some of the best drugs that we have known, but I can't get her in a clinical trial because she doesn't qualify. Her diabetes is uncontrolled. I won't put her on a medication that's going to interfere with her diabetes. So my targeted drugs, the TS, and my biologic DMARDs, she's not a candidate for because of that. So that's the disparities, and that's a patient. If you listen to that story, that might indeed sound like a patient that you're seeing every day in the practice. What is health disparities? And this kind of highlights what the health disparities look like. Many of us think the health disparities only deal with race. But when you think about it, guess what? There's a whole host of definitions that we think about with disparities. It's really religion. One of the things we find in here, and I'll show you some data, is not only the socioeconomic status, but also where those patients live and where they work. Again, take an example like with Flint, Michigan. Think what we're having an issue now in some cities in Illinois. Water is a big issue. So we know now the environment where people live can indeed play a role in and impact their outcomes of medicine. Now, I got in trouble last year. I did this talk on disparities, and it went viral on Medscape because I only focused about racial. You all talk about the black and the brown people. I need 2 hours, and I have to come back to do another series on all these other things. So today, I'm really going to highlight the racial disparities and using rheumatology as a paradigm, using it as a backdrop to kind of set the stage in where we are. So as I show you some data and highlight what we do in our practice, which some things are kind of unique. I've talked with many faculty members here today, kind of share and get some of that excitement with them as well, what we're doing. These are the results of a survey. So New England Journal of Medicine has a group of clinicians, executive leaders, and everything throughout the university, and they survey them periodically. And a couple of years ago, they asked 533 of them, hey, tell me if you think disparities or racism is a big issue in your practice and in your area that you see. And you see here up to 48%, 54% of them say yes, it's either widespread, extremely widespread, or very widespread. And they saw that. But then you break it down, everybody said, well, it's not me, it's not my department, I'm doing pretty good. But if you look at it, hey, it turns out that many of them are. So you look at this, why is the issue there? Behavioral health. We see now we have a big issue with mental health in this country. Many people are embarrassed to talk about depression, anxiety, all those different things. But think about this. It's not unusual to think about, hey, it could be a chronic disease. That disease could be diabetes, hypertension, it could be rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis. All of those things could be related to this. That's why you see chronic management and things here as well. In the hospital, some places do pretty good. Now we have protocols when they get admitted to the hospital, so maybe not as big of an issue, but it still is an issue. Some patients get into the hospital, but guess what? What are you going to do when they just discharge? Sit them out on the streets? There needs to be some follow-up. The patient was discharged from the hospital, they back again because the heart failure was uncontrolled, and we'll talk about the issue that we have with pharmacy and getting some of these drugs. So we know there's certain drivers of disparities. This is a very known article by Dr. House. My daughter's a big fan of Dr. House on the TV show. I love Dr. House as an aside. Every single problem these patients have on House, they're all rheumatology. They either have sarcoidosis and lupus and things like that. Now, I'm not going to break into somebody's house to steal the toothbrush to look at whether they have DNA to one of these diseases. But Dr. House said, hey, when you think about disparities, there are some things that drive disparities. And he said two different things. You look at this Venn diagram. So the fixed factors on the left and the modifiable factors on the right. The race and ethnicity, I can't fix that. Socioeconomic status and genetics and geographic. Now, some people say, wait, some of those things can be fixed. I'm going to kind of challenge you on that as well. On the other side, there are some things that we can modify. Psychosocial, I can address those. We talk about, hey, we have some good therapies now treating things, so researching, we can identify what to treat our patients with mental disorders. And maybe that may indeed be an overlap between inflammation and central nervous system disease. We also talk about insurance. And I'll have you show you data. Once you get a patient on a federal insurance program, that these patients, you narrow those gaps. And then, of course, about environmental hazards. That's the lead that comes in. Everybody top of mind for that as well. And when you put those things together, that drives and has a dramatic impact on morbidity and mortality. Now, go back over to the fixed factors. Say, well, yes, socioeconomic status and geographic, can't they just move? The answer is no. And a good example of that we learned in Katrina. When Katrina came around, they said, hey, everybody needs to evacuate. But many people didn't have a car. Many people couldn't pay $300 a night to get into a hotel. So guess what? They hung out in that stadium and died and all the other things that we saw with that. So we think about it's a modifier, but it's a fixed factor for a lot of people, even in a country like the US. So now let's get into a couple examples. I'll show you some stuff in rheumatology. But at the end, I'm going to say, how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from the disparities to get more closer to equity? Let's first talk about rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is one of my most common diseases. Here affects about 1% of the population. This is one of my poor kids. He's a 14-year-old boy. Look at the nodules that he has and the fingers like that of a 14-year-old boy. Looks like he's 70, 80 years old. Doing some of the most advanced therapies. It impacts the joints. It's a symmetrical arthritis. It affects one hand. It affects the other hand. Tenderness, swollenness, all those different things that we see. And it has a dramatic impact on the life. Look at the bottom three bullet points here. You talk about the fever, fatigue, tiredness, and weakness. These people go to brush their hair, they can't do it. They try to button their shirt, they can't do it. A dramatic impact. Guess what? This is amazing. In 40 to 50% of people, I can prevent this or reverse it. But here's a caveat. I got to catch it at the right time. They come into me, the cat's already in the bag, I can't do anything. But I can prevent those things earlier on. And that's what it is bears out. I'm going to show you some data that's kind of shocking when we think about that. So this is some studies we talk about. Look on two different parts of this graph. On the left here, between 2005 and 2007. On the right-hand side, you see 2010 and 2012. I want to go back with rheumatoid arthritis. Our standard treatment is methotrexate, proven in the 1980s. I make the joke I don't use that drug anymore. In 1988, I had an afro. Look at me now. I'm completely different than I was in 1988. But in 2005, we had 3 biologic drugs: etanercept, adalimumab, and infliximab. It changed our treatment paradigm. But even then, we do something called the Clinical Disease Activity Index. I'll do it with my pointer right here. It said that if we look at that Clinical Disease Activity Index and say, hey, if I break it down by race, how are those patients doing at this period of time? You see these numbers here. These are the scores that you saw here. You see the p-values. So compared to the white populations, the patients of color, Black, Hispanic, and Asians, they had more disease activity. Caveats, okay, yes, still many people hadn't caught on. 2005 was still early. Drugs approved in 1998, 98, apologize. But let's go forward, fast forward. Go to 2010, 2012. So that time we had 6 or 7 different drugs that are approved. And guess what? We still saw a difference in treating patients. And here we saw a big difference with our Hispanic population. And we asked the question, well, is that because of translations and things like this, to care, all those different things. To take it, my message from this, look at the conclusion here, we see that over a period of time, earlier on, we saw these disparities, but they really didn't change going down from 2007 out to 2012. And that's really kind of telling. This one blows your mind. When you think about this. So this is a study looking at 2 different groups in Texas. They had the public clinic, where you saw mostly Medicaid patients, poor patients of color. And then at the private clinic, more Caucasian patients, more well-to-do patients you see here as well. And on the right here, ask the question, how long did it take for those patients to get put on aggressive treatment? Even a drug like methotrexate or hydroxychloroquine, how long did it take to treat those patients? I'm going to build this line out because look at the line here. If I take the white patients here, it showed me, hey, they got on advanced therapy, and some patients within a year, but some people within 6 months, they were on therapy. But if I go all the way out here, how long did it take to get half of the Black patients treated? Almost 7 years. Now, fast forward, we have 5 or 6 different drugs then, biologic drugs that reverse the disease. I showed the hands of that little patient, I could prevent that. But when they come in, the cat's already in the bag, I can't do a whole lot for it. And that blows your mind. This group is actually doing a follow-up data now with this, at this time to 2022 to look at this as well. Does it make a difference to go to Medicare? Medicare puts some skin in the game. So it tells you in 2005, it says, as quality measures, we need to put something in there for rheumatology. You look at your hemoglobin A1C for diabetes. We look at your cholesterol, LDL for high cholesterol, and your systolic blood pressure for hypertension. Let's put something in there for patients with rheumatoid arthritis, because again, it affects 1% of the population. They said that we might want to make sure our Medicare patients are getting treated with the DMARD. And look at this data. This is a data set called the HEDIS data set that anybody can access online. And I'm going to just look at your patients here for a line and look at the curves you can see here. There's definitely some disparities. We look at the black line kind of show you where the mean is. And we break it down and say, hey, the patient over the age of 65, you look at this, it's a significant amount, almost 93,000 patients that were treated. Let's take a look at some of the older patients here. Say, why not even 85-year-old patients getting drugged? They're 30% points lower being treated with the DMARD. That's methotrexate. That's hydroxychloroquine. Because some people, even the ages are a disparity as well. Because, hey, an 85-year-old patient, I'm not going to give them the same as a 25-year-old patient. I said, no. Think about it. I got an 85-year-old patient, they're playing golf, they're volunteering in church, they're doing a lot of different things. They're physiologically like a 65-year-old patient. Now, I've got some 85-year-old patients, they're in a hospital, a nursing home, they're in a wheelchair, they get different treatment. But again, this is what it comes out. And if you break out all these different data, who are the ones that were the Spanish Medicare population? It were men. They're 3 points lower, African Americans, and those patients are low socioeconomic income. And I'm going to keep coming back to that, guys, because this is a thumb that's coming out left and right on every single study that we're doing. And I'll talk about what we're doing. So not only the income, but also in their zip code. And we're beginning to tease that out in our group. And I just highlight what we're doing. So we're doing a study with our group of patients. They say we're taking a zip code like Milwaukee, which is a poor population. And then we're taking a zip code called Elm Grove, one of the most high earning companies in Milwaukee. It's counties in Milwaukee County, cities in Milwaukee County. And what we're looking at, say, what is the prescribing rate for advanced therapies? Then we're tying that to something. Here's a caveat. We're going to look and say, hey, those patients getting advanced therapies, we know by controlling the inflammation, you control the inflammatory disease, the related to cardiovascular disease, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, the cholesterol, all those go down. So just beginning to tease out the data. We do see a little bit of discrepancy. The patients in the poor zip codes are not getting the same type of therapy as some of the others. And now we're using that for our department members as an action item. That should no longer be the case. Let's think about lupus. Lupus, again, is a disease that impacts, unfortunately, a lot of minorities. I always like to tell people about Seal. Everybody think he's got bad acne. No, that's what discoid lupus looks like. Totally preventable, guys, by the way. You get these people, put them on it, you get this stuff as well. Alopecia, we can make out somebody to grow hair again. But once they got scarring, I can't do a whole lot. But if you look at this patient who got lupus, lupus affects from head to toe. Ladies lose their hair. They get kidney disease, lung disease, heart disease, arthritis. The good news is we have medication to get people under control. The bad news, once they come in, they got kidney disease, guess what? I'm like the little boy putting his finger in the dam. I can't do a whole lot for it once that disease has gotten out of control. Here's the other thing. The mean age of a patient with lupus is 30 years old. And we know over the course of 5 to 10 years, 42% of those patients get end-stage renal disease and end up on dialysis. I was chatting with the nephrologist later on and talking about this as well. So think about it. A 30-year-old lady at 35 or 40 years old, she's on dialysis. And for black patients, a double whammy because many of them, there's not a kidney donor. They can go and get a kidney out there as well. And so therefore, you have a 40 or 50-year-old lady who's getting dialysis 3 times a week. And as you know, dialysis is a risk factor for increased mortality when you think about patients who have that disease. So, okay, let's look at the data with lupus. Let's say, hey, what do it look like when we're treating our patient with all these different drugs here? So look at the curve here. Let's look at looking at the milestones and looking at lupus mortality. We've had some great drugs here. So the advent of azathioprine, a chemotherapy we stole from oncology, it works in patients with lupus. Cyclophosphamide, it used to be the gold standard for treating people with kidney disease. And then fast forward, we got drugs like mycophenolate was used and belimumab. And over the years with these advanced therapies, guess what? We saw the mortality rates going down. Looks very, very good, right? Until you begin to look at data like this. This is data just came out last year to say, hey, what does the damage index looks like in the based on the race? So look at the black patient in the purple triangles here compared to the white patient. You definitely see more organ damage. And that organ damage in many patients could be the skin, causing the scarring that I showed you in SEAL. It could be the kidneys, ending up to dialysis, and it could be the lung. Some of these patients indeed need to be on a heart and lung transplant. This blows you away even more. I talked about the mean age of a patient with lupus is 30 years old. These are some data, some older data, but from 79 to 98 to look at, hey, who are the ones that have an increased mortality in our patient with lupus here? And we'll look at the lines here. So the dotted lines here, look at the age. These are patients 45 to 64 years old in the prime of their life, and these are the numbers that you see. And then if you look at the younger patients here, going at the dash line, oops, I'll go back a slide. If you look at the dash lines here, in our young patient with lupus, even though I've had great drugs, their mortality rate has still been going up. And that is something that's untenable when we think about what we're treating these patients. These are some data that came out of one of our meetings last year to say, hey, not only did the inflammation from lupus is bad, guess what? They have all these other comorbid conditions. We know they're arthritis from lupus. They have diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and myocardial infarctions. Think about what I said. I want to control the inflammation. And by doing that, the secondary downstream effects is going to be controlling all of these other features here. And what we see, we can definitely do that because if some patient with lupus show up with an active disease, they won't end up in my clinic. Sometimes they end up into the hospital, and you look at the cost of care of the patients like, look here. So the black patient with lupus, it costs a lot more money to take care of compared to the white patients. And I get on my colleagues and we're challenging people in the academic centers. Like I said, we all love it when a patient doesn't show up. I get a chance to check my Facebook or look at it on Instagram or do some emails. When a patient doesn't show up, that signs to me something's wrong. Did they miss their medication or they're sick for something else? It's not because there's snow on the ground. Because they don't show up, they're not controlled, they're going to end up in the hospital, and then the cost goes up. So what we've done with our group, my no-show rate has gone down to 0. Somebody doesn't show up at 9 o'clock, so my team calls them. My medical assistant calls, hey, you missed your appointment. I want to tee up your refills. I'm going to get Dr. Wells on. We turn it into a telephone call. So at the end of the day, I get paid the most for an E&M visit in person, virtual visit videos here, telephones down here. I get nothing if they don't show up. So I challenge everybody for every single patient who doesn't show, get them into a telephone call. My MAs are calling them throughout the day to get them on the control and get them on the phone. And guess what? Our no-show rate has gone down to 0. So I fed that out to all the rheumatologists in my department, and that's what we've done. No-shows are unacceptable because at the end of the day, as a provider, you're still not off the hook. You're still responsible. That patient doesn't take their steroids, you're in trouble. They miss the biologic drug, they can end up in the hospital. They get an infection, they can actually die from that. And those are things we talk about. And speaking of death, look at the mortality rate. Again, I want to show you the lines here as to kind of go through. I have something on the screen here. Let me see if I can get rid of this black box. There we go. If you look at why is popping up? If you look at what's happening here with the mortality rate you see here, look at the black line, males and the females. So males are in blue and the females in red. As you look at the patient of color, look at the mortality rate. It is actually higher across the board. Even if you got great drugs, the gap hasn't actually changed that much. You can see that there are a lot of young patients are dying. Again, that's going to kind of telltale because, again, these people are not 70, 80 years old. They're 30, 40, 51 years old, and that's the sad part. And that goes away when we talk about aggressive therapy. And then for my nephrology colleagues, we know that lupus nephritis, it's in many patients, that's a kiss of death. Their increase of mortality goes significantly higher and a dramatic increase in their morbidity as well because of that. We have some data that's come back from one of the databases here looks at as well from going up to 2019 to say, yes, now we begin to see, hey, there's a little bit higher uptake because of that. Part of it is because of more awareness that we see in the patient, but also because of the disease itself. And then we looked at data, it's a group that looked at the data and said, hey, let's check out what it talks about with patients based on their zip code and where they live. And you think that, hey, in the suburbs and these large metro centers where you got academic centers that are there, that you won't see these changes. But guess what? In the Hispanic patient in large metro centers, we did see more mortality with people with lupus nephritis. It's not good enough when a patient doesn't show up. You're not off the hook. I tell people, I personalize. Again, I have a boy and girl twin. My 30-year-old daughter developed lupus. Guess what? She missed an appointment. I'm going to get on her. I'll make sure she takes her medication. I'm not going to take no for an answer. She doesn't go to the hospital when she flares. She calls me. And that's the thing we do. But unfortunately, some of my colleagues said, well, yeah, I'm happy they didn't show. I don't care what's going on. She didn't come in. Now they call for no show. Then I can't get them in for 6 months. That doesn't happen. It's a video visit. And one of the things we've done with our group, I see a patient today, they have 3 ways they can follow up. They can do face-to-face live visit. They can do a virtual visit, telephone or video, but they can now do an e-visit. E-visit are reimbursed by Medicare and Medicaid and traditional insurance. And it says that patient is asynchronous. They can send me a message, hey, I'm doing fine. I have a side effect from my medication. I'm having a flare. What do I do? And I can respond back to them and you get reimbursed for that. But many of my colleagues hadn't figured it out. So they said, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. I can't see her today. She's going to have to come in 6 months or go to urgent care. My patients don't go to urgent care, guys. Urgent care costs $250. They don't know my medication. They're going to say, well, now you got to go see your rheumatologist. And then the patients are pissed, right? They got 2 co-pays. They come into me. So I say, hey, they know me. They know the staff. I know the drugs. They come in. And the scenario is just like with a pediatrician. The mom calls in with a sick kid. They don't say, go to the emergency room. They say, bring him in. They walk in the sick kid door. They know the doctor. They know the patient. And that's what we need to do. But many colleagues haven't caught on. They might have to wait a few minutes, but I get them all under control and we treat them. And that when you're doing that, you don't see these disparities that we talk about and go through. Okay, finally, I end up on this osteoarthritis. And then we're going to talk about, hey, what things we can do to kind of reverse this. Osteoarthritis, look at this guy with a painful knee. This is me, injured my knee skiing and playing racquetball. I had to start playing all these other paddle thing board that people are doing. But if you look at the data here, blacks versus whites, you see definitely get offered less knee replacements. Kind of sad, guys. You see these old people, the knees are almost knocking together, and the people are not doing it. They get overweight because they can't walk, they can't exercise, and then they're not even getting a knee replacement. And not only that, when they replace the knee, some data came out last year to say, hey, the patient of color, they're not getting the physical therapy they should. They get 2.6 fewer hours of physical therapy. Now, the study here wasn't statistically significant, but you say, hey, when you look at the end of the day, everybody should be getting the physical therapy. And then it dawned on me, so we can make the patient come in, they missed their appointment in the clinic. No, you send the physical therapist to the home. That's what it's covered by the insurance. And many people, well, you need to come in 3 times a week. Patients can't do that. Send the physical therapist to the home. Now, even physical therapy doing virtual stuff. They can have ways to monitor patients' movement and their steps at home and all those different things. So the knee replacements and all those things as well, and they do the same thing for hip and everything else that we talk about. So Medicare tried to change this though. We said, hey, okay, here's what we're going to do. So we're not only going to have the surgeons pay them for doing a knee replacement, we're going to say, hey, Dave, once you do a knee replacement, we're going to follow them up for the next 90 or 120 days. And everything related to that replacement, you can get reimbursed for. If that patient has no complications or anything like that, that money we gave you get to keep. But if they have complications, they're not doing well, they require other things, guess what? It's going to eat into that money. And at the end of the day, when you do that, you say, hey, now you begin to narrow some of these disparities. That now that patient who you saw with osteoarthritis and doing stuff, the surgeon's got some skin in the game. After the physical therapy, the nurse called them. How are you doing? Are you taking the meds? Any swelling that joint? The physical therapist called. Are you doing your exercises 3 times a day? All those different things. When you do that, you begin to, there's a potential to narrow these disparities. It's not rocket science, guys, but I think a little bit of emphasis to kind of get those things done. And then finally, one of my other diseases, this is becoming more and more common now. Anybody who has a TV and see commercials for psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, we can change people's world with this disease. And I'll show you some pictures. Psoriasis, as you see here, most patients who have psoriasis, about 90% of them who have body over the skin disease, you look at where it can affect the back, the elbows, the scalp, and the hands. 30% of them, 1 in 3, will go on to get some arthritis. And it's one of our most deforming and crippling types of arthritis. This is how it looks. I'll show you a patient of mine treated with advanced therapy. I can take somebody with full body psoriasis within a couple weeks, make it go away. Here it is, he is at 2 weeks, and here he is at 16 weeks. Absolutely amazing. This guy came into the clinic, was embarrassed to take his feet. I'll show you his hands first, but look at his skin. Look at his nails. I want you to pay attention to that. Here he is at baseline. Here he is at 2 weeks, and here he is at 6 weeks, 16 weeks. Had no disease. I said, okay, I need to take your shoes off. He was embarrassed. It's the first visit. I said, I definitely need to take your shoes off. And this is why he was embarrassed. Look at his toenails. Oh, yeah, you got fungal infection. We need to clip those nails. No, my God, this is psoriasis. Look at his nails now. It's absolutely amazing stuff you can see. I see people walk into my clinic with full body psoriasis. I said, where you been for the last 10 years? I can make this go away. But guess what? Everybody's got to be treated the same. And it turns out when I have some patients who have psoriasis, one, they're missing it because there's not a lot of people of color who have psoriasis in the dermatology atlases. And they see a nails like this on this other patient. Oh, yeah, just got some nail fungus. We need to clip those things. No, I put him on drug. Look at his nails. Perfect nails. Absolutely amazing. This man was blown away. He came in crying because he said in a few months, he said he was walking different. He felt different as well. So you look at this and say, with the treatment, this guy was on a biologic drug, an infusible drug that we give. We got made amazing third treatment. The guidelines say, hey, you start with an NSAID. NSAID's not going to make those nails get better. You start with an anti-TNF drug. They work okay. We have drugs that are 10 times more potent. And the DMARDs, they don't work out as well. It turns out if you look at those patients here, there was a difference in the treatment that they were getting. You think about whether we're getting even an NSAID, a TNF drug, or a DMARD. And that's the thing we see. They weren't being offered these more advanced therapies. And then a lot of numbers here to look across the trial. Well, this is a group that looked at both psoriatic arthritis, and ankylosing spondylitis, and say break it down by zip code. And do you see some disparities based on the race? You do see it here. Look at the black patients here. They were less likely to be treated. So more of these patients were not being treated with advanced therapy compared to some of the white counterparts. So it's a big problem there. And then finally, this is one of my biggest areas of telemedicine. When everything hit in 2020, I just laughed at everybody because I was doing telemedicine for 7 years. I have a license in 5 different states, so we can see people virtually anywhere. But when we ask the question, this is 1,500 patients from the RAND questionnaire. As almost anybody had the Nielsen monitor you do at home. We did that for a while to kind of look at it if you're viewing commercials. But actually, the question, look at the patients who are less likely to do this. You look at the female patients versus the male. You look at the age and versus the white patients. And what we saw here that patients who are black, over the age of 65, or had less education, were less willing to do this virtual visit. And we find out part of it, not that they weren't willing, didn't know how to use it, but guess what? There's no internet access at home. They didn't have a smartphone. And that's the kind of thing that we're seeing. So we go around, we talk about that and teach people how to do telemedicine as well. And then we wrote a chapter in a textbook last year that talks about telemedicine and how we address these issues with disparities. Okay, so that's the problem. And I highlight rheumatology. Now how do we start getting to equity? So how do we bridge that gap and how do we make some difference here? So equity, here's the one thing I highlight with you, because it should be a continuous effort. Everybody's going out and hiring a black person to be their D&I counterpart. They're doing stuff and they check that box. That's not good enough. You've got to do it on a long-term basis. We didn't get to where we are today. It's not going to get better today. We need to continue to monitor it. It should be a continuous metric that we look at. Have matrices set in place and kind of follow these people along and kind of see what's going on. I'll give you some hints about what we do. So look at this thing. On one side, we got disparities. On the other side, we got equity. How do we bridge that gap? And Kenny come talk. Let's walk our way through it. So first thing we shouldn't need for our people that we're teaching in medicine, we shouldn't start using ethnicity. And I go through some data here to show you as well. This is kind of blows you away, guys. At the University of Virginia, they interviewed some residents. You asked the question. This is only a few years ago, 2020, 2021. True or false? Blacks have thicker skin than whites. And most of the white residents thought yes. They would have failed histology class. Our skin is the same thickness, guys. There's no difference. But they thought that blacks had thicker skin. And that blows you away. And so we propose here, when you're doing a case presentation, hey, like I said, a 17-year-old lady, in my case I didn't say a 17-year-old white lady, black lady, Hispanic, because it doesn't matter. She had the active disease. So we're saying we should get rid of that ethnicity in our case presentations. They're not relevant. I remember growing up when I was doing medical school in Florida, they say, hey, yeah, everybody who came in, they said a black man, everybody's saying, okay, sickle cell or drugs. And therefore, you've got these blinders on. 25-year-old man with arthritis, it opens up my differential. 25-year-old black man, I'm thinking of something else. And that's where we need to get rid of that and get part of that barrier out the way. Here we are. We got to see on John Lewis before he died, signing the book and everything here too. He said he started causing some good trouble. And what he recommended here is that we think about things here too. Again, first identify the root cause of what's going on at your institution and say, this is what we think is coming on. We're talking about, is it coming from Flint or from Detroit? Guess what? Make those patients do a virtual visit. I may only see them once a year. They can do a telephone call, a video visit, or I can do an e-visit. You can be reimbursed for that. They also need me to prioritize this. It's going to be one of my top minds. Like I said, no-show rate. The no-show rate should be 0. In my department, it's gone down dramatically. I would not tolerate a no-show rate of 5 or 10%. I'm not making any money when patients don't show up. You do these telephone visits, we talk about this as well. in implementing those things and monitoring those things so you can do that and kind of follow how they do. The first thing is erase these pharmacy deserts, and this is what we talked about. This is really embarrassing for me, guys. There's a study that came out, and this was in JAMA 2 years ago. They say, hey, if you look at the pharmacy desert, there are 5 zip codes that where we see the biggest disparities, and look at them. It's in Chicago, where I live. It's Milwaukee, where I work. And the other zip codes here were Los Angeles, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Dallas, and Boston, and Albuquerque. So think about this. You got a patient who gets admitted for congestive heart failure. He's back in the hospital a week later. Why? There's not a Walgreens or CVS in the street. He didn't get his Lasix fill. A lady with COPD gets a flare. She comes back in because she couldn't get the inhaler, didn't know how to use it. So we need to come up with ways to get pharmacy deserts. So one of the ideas we've been talking about here too, can we have a pharmacy place in different areas where patients might go and work and live? Can we have these boxes here where the pharmacy is there? They scan in a code that opens up the box, they can get their drug right around the block from them. We don't want it out in the streets for people to break into those. They think something's valuable in those. But we got to get rid of these deserts, guys. We all focus on food deserts, but people overlook the pharmacy deserts. And now Amazon and other companies think, hey, now I can have a drone to deliver those things to you, a drop box and all those different things. But the pharmacy desert we often overlook in the ways to kind of monitor and see where you are. This is my biggest pet peeve. Think about costs of these drugs. I have my doctor say, oh yeah, I'm gonna put that patient I showed you with psoriasis on a very expensive drug, $60,000 a year. I'm gonna put them on methotrexate. I said, well, methotrexate is not FDA approved. I want my patient on an FDA approved drug. I don't use experimental drugs. I only use drugs that have been FDA approved and have that indication. But here's the bottom line. Cost is not the same as worth. And indeed, if I have a black patient with psoriasis versus a white patient, everybody's worth it. I don't care how much these drugs cost. That's my issue. At the end of the day, I say, are my patients worth it? My 30-year-old daughter with lupus, she's worth the aggressive treatment. I'm not going to wait till she get worse and worse and one foot in the door for a dialysis unit before I treat her. But many of my colleagues that way. At the end of the day, we say, hey, if you're Christian, believe in the Bible, say, who gave you the stewardship over the cost? Your job is giving the best evidence-based medicine, particularly at a university like this. Forget the costs. I got a patient, I'll tell you, for example, here, what we think about what we do. Here's a company, again, I speak for this company, I use an example. Aurinia has a drug that we use for lupus nephritis, expensive drug. 90% of that patients pay $0 for it. And again, if you look at how many people, 97% pay $10 or less. So you think about the cost, it's just a smoke ring. Doctors put that out there and say, oh, I'm worried about the cost. These doctors are not over my regimen or what to do. I'm on blood pressure medicine. I want the best drug for my blood pressure. I want the best cholesterol, the diabetic drug, etc. You see, cost is not the same as worth. But many doctors think that, and they shouldn't do that. And now companies have ways and resources that we do that. So we have partnered with our companies for Medicare patients, TRICARE patients to get these drugs. Medicaid, many of these drugs are covered. Cost is not the same as worth. And when we start thinking about cost, that's a big thing with disparities, and doctors should stop doing that. How can corporate America play a big role? And I think this is really key. I'll give you a good example. This is Novartis, what they've done. Look here, guys. They've given a 10-year pledge for the HBCUs, like Morehouse and others, and they've given up, I think it's $10 million over a 10-year time period to kind of get them out to do what things to do, get them into medicine and science. So first of all, they enabling new generations of African-American leaders in science and research, and digitally enabled. So hey, they have mentorship. The mentor might be in Atlanta where Morehouse is, but the mentor could be somebody like me in Chicago. It could be a physician in New York. It could be all those different ones. And actually research validating these ideas. I challenge the company. I say, I would even go a step further. I would go to the high school. I have a young black patient who wants a science project. Let them mentor and run that project by me. Help me tweak that. I can do all that virtual. That's one of the things that we could do. And then when you do that, have these digital network of centers where you can do this research. And that's the role that Medicare, these pharmaceutical companies can play. This is another one, guys. This is a sad story here. Janssen started a project. They started looking at the hospitals in Chicago. And this almost makes you cry. They're looking at people with peripheral artery disease that can be repaired by surgery. But in some hospitals in Chicago, instead of repairing that joint, giving a stent, they amputate the leg. The amputation rates are 4 to 5 times higher in those hospitals compared to like Northwestern and Rush. So you got these poor people, 40, 50 years old, they're not getting vascular limb-saving therapy. They're cutting the limbs off. And that's untenable in 2022 and 2023. So they came up with an initiative to say, hey, we started these peripheral artery disease clinics. They're telling patients what they need to look out for, empowering them what to look out for, and putting these surgeons on the spot to say you cannot be cutting off people's legs. It's happening right now, guys. And that is almost, it's antiquated, it blows you away when you think about what they're doing. That's happened right now in Chicago and other cities as well. So Janssen has invested a lot of money in this because they have drugs for cardiovascular disease, but nobody should be walking around with one leg because the surgeon doesn't want to. It's easier for them to cut the leg off as opposed to putting a stent in, put them on blood thinners and doing those kind of things. And they have other programs that they've done in immunology and neurosciences and things along those lines. I talked about how we talk about clinical trials, and some companies like Pfizer say, hey, we want to do a clinical trial for our drug for psoriasis, but guess what? We want to make sure that this represents the patient population. And look what they've done here is they say, hey, we want to make sure it captures the patient that we're treating on clinical trials. So the number of Asian patients we want to look at, the number of African-American and white patients we look at as well. And indeed, now as we sit on not working without in IRB at our university, we're saying, hey, based on the 2020 census, the African-American population around 13%, we need at least that in our clinical trials. Because when a drug comes out, I'm not just going to use these drugs in black patients or white patients, I'm using it in everybody. So we need to make sure we're hitting that ballpark as we follow those patients kind of going across the board. That's what these companies are doing. They say, hey, I'm going to give you this drug, I want the trial, but if you sign that contract and do this, look at this protocol, we need this percentage of patients in there. And I think it's good to have that in mind. I'm a little concerned now as you talk about the Supreme Court, they're looking at getting rid of all the different things, but using race as a factor for education, things like that. Guys, we hadn't gotten rid of the racism from 200 years ago. If every single black was able to read and write and own land, we wouldn't be where we are. And now they want to reverse what's been going on. I mean, it really blows you away when you think about what's going on there. What about creative policies to decrease these unmet needs? This is one thing we're talking about. This is what we can do as a country. Expanding Medicare and Medicaid. With Obamacare, it's so funny. You ask people, do you want do you leave Obamacare? Many of these poor white people say, no, I don't want Obamacare. Or do you want to be able to go to your doctor? You want to have decreased co-pays? You want free insulin? Yes, I want all those things. That's what Obamacare affords. But what this shows here, if you look at our Medicare and our Medicaid plans, once patients get on, here you are before they get into Medicare. Once they get into Medicare, look at the gap shortens between all these different racial groups. So Medicare is really good. And you think about this as well. As I get close to that Medicare age, I'm looking very closely at all these different plans, but that's what we need to do. And that's why expanding Medicare and Medicaid, here's one thing people won't tell you. I used to run my own practice before I joined this group. The best payers for physicians are Medicare and Medicaid. Many people won't tell you that, or some doctors don't know. I see a Medicare and Medicaid patient, that money goes into my bank account within 2 weeks. Blue Cross, United, Aetna, they're going to wait 3 or 4 months to make sure I got everything there before they pay me, all this kind of stuff. Medicare and Medicaid drives our practices, and that's many doctors don't know that. And then if you look at these things going across the board, even looking at data from 2000 up to 2018, look at these trends in the state, when we look at the healthcare, looking at these differences. Once they get onto insurance, you see these differences go down. We still have some room we need to do, particularly in some of our Latino population, but on some of these other groups, we see disparities begin to narrow. Then I have a provocative idea. My kids were a big fan of Andrew Yang when he was running for president because they wanted $1,000 a month. I said, wow, that all sounds really pretty good. But then I came up with this idea. So we're doing a project now, something called chronic care management. And because we know there's not, all patients don't have a smartphone or internet access, everybody's getting an iPhone 7. It has an app that's downloaded on that. And again, because I'm booking out, they told me yesterday in clinic, I'm booking out until August. So they might not be able to see me for 6 months, but then they can interact with me every month based on this. And then Medicare with these new chronic care management codes to say, I can see that patient or interact them for up to 20 or 40 minutes and get paid for that. And that's the reimbursement. Going back to that no-show rate, that patient doesn't show up, I still can interact and do stuff with them, and I can get reimbursed for that. So chronic care management said you have to have at least 2 chronic diseases that I'm monitoring. So I came with this idea. I said, hey, if I was running for president, these are the things I would propose. So if I have a patient who has 2 chronic diseases, I would give them this medical card that has $1,000 per month on that. Everybody says it's a lot, but look what it covers, guys. It covers the copays. It covers insulin, the EpiPen, $600, whatever that is, right? Eyeglasses. It's a shame. You see these guys with tape on their eyeglasses? You see guys coming in and made their own cane? That's just incredible. Transportation, that's a big thing here too. I have patients, hey, for an 8 o'clock appointment, they got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to take the shuttle. And at the end of the day, guys, I try to get out by 5:30. There's some people still sitting in my lobby because the van is not there. And I'm not going to put them outside and make them sit out in the cold. I got to stay there until the patient leaves the clinic. But if I was Elon Musk, I would say, hey, everybody has a Tesla that you can come in here, or that cart would go for an Uber. You schedule an Uber, call them, they pick you up. It's paid for. We can do it, guys. We have the resources. Well, you see here what it is. So now, like for somebody like me, I don't need $1,000 a month. I would love $100 to cover my contacts, right? I can get something out of the system. But this is the whole thing. So we're paying for this. So then the patient's not going to show up because they can't make it to the clinic, or they're not going to wait 4 hours for a 15-minute visit. They can do telephone visits, telemedicine visits. If they don't have a smartphone, guess what? That $1,000 will cover the internet access. It will cover a smartphone. Get an iPhone 7, a refurbished one is $99. We have the resources. We can fix it tomorrow. But we got to have that initiative. We got to think about what we can do because it matters to all of us when we think about doing this as well. So going back to our colleagues and talk about in healthcare, what things you can do, what kind of changes can we make? And they say here, again, a lot of different things you can do at the institutional level, individual level, and at the department level. So some of these ideas I've kind of thrown out to you, you can begin to make these impacts almost immediately. It's not that hard. The resources exist and things we can do. So we have the disparities on one side. We got the equities on the other side, and how do we bridge that gap? I'll give you several different ideas and stuff like this of what we've done. So some of these things that we're beginning to take on, like I said, like this whole project that we do with the iPhone 7, we'll have some data on that coming up really soon. I talked about how our no-show rate is going down, and we making sure people get aggressive therapy. We definitely partner with the pharmaceutical companies. I can get somebody in the clinical trial and have drugs available that nowhere else in the Midwest has. All those things we can do today to get those patients under control. And as an institution, societal level, we need to be a little creative. Instead of sending new ships and everything to the moon, let's get patients under control here. When my diabetes and obesity rate goes down in the U.S., then I'm going to send some things to the Mars where I can send people out. Then I'm going to be doing all these other things. Let's address some of these issues and everything here too as well. We can afford to send tanks to Ukraine. I'm in favor of that. Take the cost of building 10 of those tanks and get all my patients with a continuous glucose monitor. That's the kind of thing we need to do and think about being creative with this as well. The final thing I talk about is getting people in clinical trials. I'm a big fan of clinical trials. I think everybody say, well, why can I get more Blacks and Hispanics to enroll in clinical trials? I think the part of the issue is like in who they're talking to. I can easily talk to an African-American patient and get them into a trial because, hey, I'm going to give you the same treatment if you're my daughter. You're not going to be a guinea pig. You're going to get the best treatment. At the end of the day, if you don't want to do a trial, guess what? I'm still going to give you the best care. And then they can talk about that. And also, some of our trials now, patients get a device at home. So instead of coming in every month, we can document how they're doing in the clinical trials virtually. Then they only come in every 3 months and think about that. What we've seen here, as you follow these patients going along, we can see the clinical trials. And sometimes we've done pretty good. I put the data here for the U.S. Census. So look at the Caucasian patients. I said about African Americans, 13% of the population. Look at the Asian patients here. So we've done some good. We still got a little room we need to do with some of our Asian patients reaching out. Part of this could be a language barrier, but we need to make sure we have a resource now. We can reach out to somebody virtually. You can almost interpret. We have a lot of people who speak Hmong, who speak Arabic, all these different languages we can have reach out. Turkish is where we're hurting. That's why I use that lady as an example to making sure we get somebody who understands that. I do all the Swedish interpretation. We still have some people in the 80s and 90s who are Swedish as their first language. And then when you do this, just to talk about here, to look at the disparities for our trials, looking at psoriatic arthritis, there is still a big gap. Everybody said, well, Blacks don't get psoriasis. Yes, because you need to look and see. You need to have a picture. Sometimes look at the driver's license. Your rash, your face looks different than when you did 5 or 10 years ago before you had your license. And that's where the data comes up when we talk about the clinical trials. Bridging the gap of disparities, it matters for all of us. And we all have skin in the game. And at the end of the day, I tell you, if patients were being treated like we were with somebody in our own clinic, our own family, they wouldn't be where we are today. The country's on edge because what's going to happen in Memphis tonight, I can almost guarantee you if that little boy that they were chasing and beat up looked like somebody in their family, they would not be where they are. Those guys are sitting in jail, and I'm afraid the country's going to be in turmoil because of that. Treat patients like you would they are as somebody in your family. Give them the best medication because all patients are worth it. Thank you very much. Let me stop for a minute there, see if there's any questions or comments. Thank you. And I'll go back to my last slide here. Don't tantalize your patients. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. West. When I heard last time, it's even better today. It's eye-opening with all this data. I heard quite a few health disparity talks, very different, very much opinion, no data. This is really data-driven talk. Let's open the floor for the question, either online or on the audience, in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. It's a wonderful presentation. I think key to this too is making sure that the treatment teams and the research teams represent the patients that they're trying to recruit into the trials. And do you have thoughts about how we might be able to expand those efforts as well?
Yeah, that's a big issue. So I tell the story. When I was at Duke, and I left Duke in 2022, and they lost 25% of their African-American faculty. We had 4 people on staff at that time. And so that's the thing we need to do. And that's why I think what some of the companies like Novartis have done, They're investing in getting more younger people to go into science, into research. I keep saying it's not just medicine, guys. So we talk about in pharmacy and all these nursing, all these different things where we need people. Because indeed, if you have researchers that look like their patients, that conversation is easier. But then I challenge people to say, you might not have a researcher there. So I say, hey, can they partner with a patient of color in another center? Let's talk with them so you can see how their experience has been. Talk with another researcher using stuff. We're in this virtual world, and that's what we need to talk about as well. Because I was just talking about earlier, I say, hey, how are we practicing today, guys? Think about it. In 2 years, will be completely different. I say, but most of my patients I'm seeing on a daily basis will be at home. I might only go to the clinic 1 day a week, a half day to do procedures and things like that. But that's what we need to do. So training people, but I said starting undergrad is almost too late, right? We need to start in high school, maybe even junior high, get them involved in science projects, let them spend a month in my clinic to see what I do, get some exposure to research, all of those different things. And you will put that fire underneath them. My gosh, they're ready to go. And that's what we need.
Question? I have one.
Yes, please.
The future perhaps could be online, telemedicine.
Yes.
For academic center like UM, like Wisconsin, right?
Yep.
Milwaukee, it's a very nice place. What are the best way to reach Detroit, Flint, use of telemedicine? So that's perhaps the future. And assuming perhaps not very many people want to open clinic in that site.
I know. I give examples. I'm from South Carolina. My mother's 88 years old, which went to see her celebrate her birthday early this month. Make a long story short, a doctor wanted to order a CT scan of her abdomen and wanted to make her come in for a follow-up visit. I talked to my mom twice every single day. I said, Mom, you don't need to go for a follow-up visit just to go over your results. They can do that way by telemedicine. So when she went to have the test done, she said, I want to schedule a follow-up visit. I want to see if I can do that virtually by telephone. The receptionist told her no. And she called me and told me, I said, no, that's not true. Before I could call the doctor, the office manager called her back. So I apologize. They told you wrong. Indeed, we can set up a telephone visit. It's covered by Medicare, and we can review your phone results virtually. And that's what they did. So the challenging part was the cities like we have the same thing. So I practiced in a nice suburb of Milwaukee. I have people coming from Milwaukee. I have people coming from Chicago and everything like this. All the stuff I explained to you is stuff I deal with every single day. So the Flint and Detroit, the same type of thing. Those patients probably might only need to be seen once a year physically here. But here's the caveat. I need to do all this other stuff virtually. So in 2020, we started a program too because we found out that many of our patients didn't have internet access, guys. So we did something creative. We did a program with the library. So I did a project with the library because libraries have internet access. Everybody has the library because you pay taxes. And then we had a program, 40 different patients came in and taught them how to do a televisit. So now they can call the library. They can book the telemedicine room from 1 to 1:30. Here's a caveat. They got to have somebody know with them to log into Epic or Cerner or whatever it is. Then the room is cleaned down by the librarian and somebody else has that room available. They have the internet access there. Because again, that's why, again, what Biden is pushing, widespread internet need to be available for everybody. Because that's how kids are learning. That's how we're going to be seeing medicine. If we don't have it available in South Carolina, Flint, and Detroit, we'll be left behind. So those people, when they get sick, they go to the emergency room. It's going to cost them a lot more and things like that. So my challenge to my colleagues is, so I see some patients only once a year, but I'm seeing them once a month and interacting with them, and we're getting paid almost the same amount. So the American Telemedicine Association, the American Association of Medical Association, they push to have these televisits codes still being reimbursed. And right now, we're still in what we call the public health emergency. I think it's going to expire in June. But the Congress has put into act is good for another 6 months after that. So all those organizations are really pushed to make sure to have those codes in place because the world's not going to change. I gave you an example early on. People who work for Amazon, Amazon patients can go with Amazon, get off the assembly line, they go into a little room, and for $1, they can connect with the doctor virtually. They go to the doctor, they got to take a half day off. Nobody's in the line taking all those boxes, right? Loading up those blue trucks. Amazon said, no, we'll pay for you. You only pay $1. Guess what? You get back to the line. They're doing it right now. So that's what we need to do with Detroit and Flint. So again, making sure doctors know about that, offer that to the patients, live visit, virtual, telephone or video, or e-visits, and you can get paid for it. The codes are out there. They already exist. They've been around for years. And they're not that much different from live. And that's the thing we talk about. So offer that to patients. They can't have a video, let's do a telephone. Things like this as well.
Any question online? Any question in the audience?
Yes, Nick.
I just wanted to share a story that I had learned about in Los Angeles. Understanding that many African Americans need mental health support, but getting to it is a problem. A young man started a nonprofit. So he equipped a van to have the internet access and to be able to do the telehealth visits. And it became so popular, people invested. So he actually has now a suite of
Wow.
vans to do that. And it's been well received in the African American community. So it brings the internet to the patient to support them in connecting with their healthcare provider.
That's another good example of what we can do. I mean, growing up, I remember the bookmobile coming around to your neighborhood doing the same type of thing. I saw on 60 Minutes a few, maybe earlier this year, last year, a house of nurses did the same thing. They got this RV and remodeled that. They go out and doing glucose checks and all those different things and going to the poor communities. Like I said, I highlighted race here, guys, but if I did a talk with data from West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, it's going to be those poor white people, no teeth, don't go to specialists, they don't take their medication, diabetes, obesity. You can go on and on. But the public perception is poor people of color. We only represent 13% of the U.S. What about the other 67 or 87%? And that's the thing we worry about. And that's why these things are created. We got the technology. Like I said, that $1,000 a month could go do a lot of different things. So the good comment.
Can you also elaborate your $100 iPhone? I think that's a really
Yes.
innovative and this is very feasible. Have you used it for pharmacy desert type of thing yet?
So yes,
And I
that's
know we have a few faculty doing iPhone app to do that. I think that's would be very transferable.
So 2 years was approached by a company out of Sweden, because of my Swedish connection. They're the ones who developed Spotify. And so they have an application now that we're looking at. And we turned out to doing so with the chronic care management codes. I was kind of blown away. I thought I was on cutting edge, but chronic care management codes have been around since 2016. I just found out about them 2 years ago. And that's why I said many of my colleagues do not know about these codes. So we said, let's do a little trial. 25 patients will get an iPhone 7, and 25 patients will do standard of care. We're looking at the outcomes based on patient satisfaction, my satisfaction, and their disease activity. And so we're right in the middle of the trial, kind of begin to track those results and kind of see where they are. Because I can tell you, so what we did, iPhone 7, which is the lowest one that covers all the data. It was loaded with the data, internet access, so a patient had nothing. And I joke about some patients love it because they feel they got me in their back pocket. They can connect with me, they can send a message because they know it's all going to be interacted with. Because I spend 20 minutes a month, I get paid with Medicare, which comes to $74. Traditional standards is almost $150, guys, just for 20 minutes. And that could go up to 40 minutes. It's reimbursed. That's the thing that people don't know. No-show rates, I tell you, I go with the rheumatology department now, they can say, yeah, no-show rates, 5%, 10%. I said, it's unacceptable. If I ran the department, it would be completely different. So now the next step is seen here. It's because in this app, we ask the question, are you refilling your medications? Any issue with your medication? Any side effects? So I haven't asked the question yet about the pharmacy desert. So like the next thing is say, hey, are you able to get your medicines filled? Many of our drugs are being delivered to the patient. So these biologic drugs are done, but other standard drugs, they do have to go to the pharmacy. Well, like I said, you go to some city, the inner cities, like for example, Chicago, there's no Walmart in Chicago because the law is not allowed to be there because it compete with some of the mom and pop shops. Walgreens and CVS is not on every block that you see. Starbucks is there. You go to get your Starbucks, right? Everybody, I was joking. Everybody's laughing about how much a dozen of eggs cost, but think about how much a cup of coffee costs. And we pay for our Starbucks. No, it's not Starbucks you have. But all the stuff we talk about. So no, we need to address the pharmacy desert, guys, because it really is a big deal. Because once you say making sure that patient gets that drug, and then making sure they don't come back into the hospital. And that's why, as a patient gets discharged, congestive heart failure, COPD, or whatever it is, a nurse can follow up, a medical assistant can follow up, and then that code, that follow-up is reimbursed. It could be a healthcare provider. The different levels for MA, for a pharmacist, for occupational therapist versus the MD, but it's still reimbursed. And that many people don't know. So actually, the billing department, what is the e-visit codes, what are the virtual visit codes, the telephone codes, they're all out there, and that gets rid of that desert. Because the patient didn't get their Lasix, then we can say, hey, let's make sure they get it delivered so we keep them out of the emergency room. Well, thank you all for your time. I would love to come back and talk more, but this has been very exciting. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you.